turn of the year, North Korea has opened up to engage in dialogue with South Korea and the US. But amidst all these summits and talks of denuclearization, one of the issues that does not yet seem to have been addressed by the leadership is the humanitarian crisis in North Korea. Millions continue to suffer due to little or no access to the basic necessities such as food and medical assistance. A raging epidemic of tuberculosis has been present in North Korea for decades, and currently over 100,000 are infected and thousands dying each year. At the forefront of the battle against the disease, though, is the Eugene Bell Foundation, an American humanitarian organization that has been working within North Korea since the mid-1990s. It has treated hundreds of thousands of North Koreans, surviving all of the geopolitical storms with the US and the international community. We'll talk with its founder and chairman, Dr. Stephen Linton, later in the show. But first, we head over to our news centre, where Devin Whiting will update us with the latest stories at this hour. Devin?
Hi, Jong-ho. The South Korean presidential Blue House has announced some personnel changes earlier this morning. Not only is it the very first reshuffle by President Moon since he took office in May last year, but notably, the president has replaced his top aides for economic affairs and job creation. Our chief Blue House correspondent, Moon Kan-young, reports.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in has replaced three of his key senior aides as the administration begins its second year in office and putting extra emphasis on household economics and job creation. The surprise announcement was made by the president's chief of staff Im Jong-seok Tuesday morning, only a day and a half after the South Korean leaders returned from a 4-day state visit to Russia.
The president has appointed Presidential Secretary for Policy Planning, Jung Tae-ho, to Senior Presidential Secretary for Job Creation, and Yoon Jong-un, who currently serves as the South Korean ambassador to the OECD, to Senior Presidential Secretary for Economic Affairs. The president also named a new Senior Presidential Secretary for Civil Society, Lee Yong-sun, a district chief of the ruling Democratic Party, replacing the current Senior Secretary for Civic Reform.
Jung Tae-ho, who has also served as Secretary of State Affairs and Policy Coordination at the office of the president during the Roh Moo-hyun administration, will step in to head job creation, while Yoon Jong-won, a former director from the Finance Ministry and currently permanent representative to the OECD, will replace Hong Jang-pyo as Chief Secretary for Economic Affairs. Lee Yong-sun, named to the post of Senior Presidential Secretary for Civil Society, used to head the policy planning team at the Citizens Coalition for Economic Justice.
The past year has been a period of setting the policy direction of the Moon Jae-in government, which is income-led, innovation-led growth, and fair economy. I hope you understand the reshuffle as the president's determination to create actual results that the people can feel by stepping on the accelerator in the second year.
Moon Kan-young, Arirang News, The Blue House.
The two Koreas are sitting down for another round of discussions today. This time, they're talking about cooperation on linking up their railroads. The two sides have exchanged a draft agreement, but with the discussions ongoing, it's not yet known what's in it. Oh Jung-hee has more.
Delegations from Seoul and Pyongyang met again on Tuesday, this time to discuss inter-Korean rail connections. The talks began at 10 a.m. Korea time at the border village of Panmunjom. It's the first time that the two Koreas have discussed railways since 2008. The delegates stressed they'll try and touch upon various practical issues to successfully implement April summit agreement, the Panmunjom Declaration.
There's been a drought recently, and the weather's been pretty hot. But today, we're seeing some welcome rain, and the Imjingang River rose as well. I have a feeling that we could see some good results from our meeting today.
I believe there are no differences on our willingness to connect our people's rail artery. Railways are the future of our economy. I believe if we put our wisdom and power together on this glorious project, we could create some good results for our people.
The two Koreas connected one railway in 2004 between the South Korean capital Seoul and North Korean city of Sinuiju, but renovation is needed to modernize it. In addition to that railway, South and North Korea are hoping to connect their railway along the eastern coast of the peninsula, which would start off in South Korea's southeastern city of Busan, cut through North Korea, and even go into Russia and head towards Europe. For that, the two Koreas will also have to find a way to modernize North Korea's railroads, which are very old and can only allow trains to travel at low speeds. But if it can be done, it would have a big impact. South Korea will be connected to the rest of the continent, which would enable the movement of people and goods to Asia and Europe by train. But it's difficult to expect specific actions needed for actually connecting and upgrading railways because of the international sanctions on North Korea. So for now, Seoul and Pyongyang are expected to agree on investigating the current status of the rail network and conducting joint studies on how to modernize it. 오정희, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the top defense officials of South Korea and the United States will be holding talks on Thursday in Seoul. South Korea's defense ministry says Minister Song Young-moo and his U.S. counterpart James Mattis will meet at 2 p.m. Korea time. Mattis will be in Seoul only for a day. The two will discuss the allies' military cooperation and issues related to implementing agreements reached during the Inter-Korean Summit as well as the Pyongyang-Washington Summit. Song and Mattis are also expected to discuss plans to eventually transfer wartime operational control from the U.S. to South Korea. And this morning, the allies began their fourth round of negotiations on sharing defense costs. The two-day discussions are led by the South Korean Foreign Ministry's representative for defense burden sharing, Jang-won-sam, and his U.S. counterpart Timothy Betts. The first round of talks was held in March, but no deal yet. According to the two countries' Special Measures Agreement, or SMA, South Korea pays for South Koreans working at U.S. bases, as well as costs related to facility construction and logistics. This year, South Korea is expected to pay some $900 million or around 50% of the total cost of having U.S. troops stationed here. The current SMA, signed in 2014, will expire at the end of this year, so Seoul and Washington want to sign a new one before then. South Korea's Consumer Sentiment Index is at its lowest point since April last year. The Bank of Korea attributes the dip to gloomy jobs numbers and trade tensions between the U.S. and China. Our Ko Yoon-hee has the details.
South Korea's consumer confidence dipped in June to its lowest point in 14 months. According to the Bank of Korea, the Composite Sentiment Index dropped 2.4 points from the previous month to 105.5. Its lowest level since April 2017. A reading above 100 means there are more optimists than pessimists about the economy. The nation's central bank attributed the fall to two main concerns for South Koreans: sluggish job figures and the U.S.-China trade spat. Earlier this month, Statistics Korea announced that the unemployment rate for Koreans aged 15 to 29 was 10.5%. The highest on record since related figures were first compiled in 1999. South Koreans were also pessimistic about the nation's economy because of increasing tensions between the U.S. and China. U.S. President Donald Trump announced earlier in June that he will press ahead with a 25% tariff on Chinese imports, and China's Commerce Ministry said it would apply countermeasures of the same scale. The Bank of Korea said South Koreans were worried about the damage to the nation's exporters, which produce parts that go into China's final products. It also added that other external factors might have affected people's sentiment, such as U.S. Federal Reserve raising interest rates.
South Korean stocks dropped in June. This is related to another rate hike by the U.S. Fed. Other emerging economies such as Turkey or Brazil have been seeing capital outflows after the move.
The Bank of Korea predicted that next month's Consumer Sentiment Index will likely be affected by what happens to the nation's exports. Ko Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
Now, as mentioned earlier, we have a special guest in the studio with us here today. We are joined by Dr. Stephen Linton, the founder and chairman of the Eugene Bell Foundation, a Korean and US charity that provides medical humanitarian assistance to North Korea. The foundation was established in 1995 at the height of the famine that killed millions. It originally provided food aid to the regime, but has since been providing medical aid, specifically for tuberculosis. Some 250,000 patients have been treated over the years and is now currently tackling drug-resistant tuberculosis. However, despite the charity's efforts, there are still over 100,000 infected with the disease and thousands die every year. Dr. Linton's ties with North Korea have led to him visiting more than 80 times over the last 40 years. He was last in North Korea in May, continuing to try and provide aid to the North Korean people. Dr. Linton, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for your invitation.
As I mentioned, you last visited North Korea just last month this year. Can you tell us about the trip, and with it, can you explain what the Eugene Foundation does in North Korea?
Well, we usually go twice a year. We have a multi-drug resistant TB program in 12 separate centers on the West Coast. And we visit every center and we meet with every patient. We discharge patients who've completed the program and enroll new patients every time. So this is an ongoing thing. Our shipments of medication are timed so that they get there before our trips, and we deliver the medication to the centers that we support.
As I mentioned, you visited North Korea dozens of times, but the timing of this visit has caught my attention here, because it was just after the Inter-Korean Summit in April and just before the US Summit in June. Was there anything different that you felt this time when you went? Were North Koreans aware of the summits, and what was their reaction to it?
They're definitely aware of it. You have to say that probably the division of Korea has incurred more suffering on North Koreans than anyone else. They've paid the highest price for the tragedy of Korea, and therefore, understandably, they're very hopeful that a better future lies ahead for them. Cautiously hopeful is the attitude today, I think. Be best sum it up.
You've been there before when they had previous Inter-Korean summits as well. And was there the same kind of hope back then as it is now?
Oh no, this is different, because this time the U.S. is on board. I think that in previous years the U.S. has not been on board, and so I think North Koreans consider a better relationship with the U.S. to be key to a better future, and therefore there's a lot more hope this time.
Let's talk about the humanitarian issue, the situation in North Korea right now. There were unconfirmed reports that one of the first things North Korea asked for in exchange for denuclearization was medical aid in their negotiations with the US. Do you believe that? I mean, how bad is the health situation in North Korea right now?
Well, it's been a challenge. Health has been a challenge for a long time. But I would be surprised if they had asked for medical aid first, because in a normal context, in these situations, the request is for economic activity. And you see reports of discussions about trains and roads and that sort of thing. So one of the challenges and one of the concerns that I have at a time when North-South relations are moving forward with the concurrence of the U.S. is that, in fact, humanitarian concerns could be left behind for all those other issues that people are usually much more interested in.
The Eugene Foundation is trying to tackle the tuberculosis epidemic in North Korea and has been doing so for over 20 years now. How urgent is the situation with tuberculosis, and what are some of the biggest challenges?
Well, tuberculosis is North Korea's number 1, 2, and 3 biggest health challenge. I think it far outstrips any other disease, and arguably even concerns for malnutrition, because it's an airborne infection. And it can go dormant and become active decades after someone actually contracts it. So there's no question about it being the most concern from a health standpoint. The program that has been in place as of 2018 was not adequate. Because there's no vaccination, the only way to deal with tuberculosis is to treat all the patients. And despite the fact that the Global Fund was treating all regular TB patients, not all of North Korean TB patients were being treated, because there is an estimated about 8,000 people who are infected with mutant TB every year. We have been treating about 15% of those people. The Global Fund had a program that treated about 5. So up until this year, 100% of registered regular TB patients, about 130,000 people, were covered by the Global Fund. 5% of MDR patients were covered by the Global Fund, and 15% of them were covered by us. But there's a huge gap there. There's a gap of 80% who were not covered. And if you don't treat these people, the numbers of MDR patients just increases. So this is much worse than Ebola. I think if it were Ebola, people would be much more excited about it. But actually, because it's TB and because it kills people slower, it has never received the sort of attention that it deserves.
So Eugene has been trying to tackle the mutated, the drug-resistant type of TB for the last few years. As you talked about the Global Fund before, but can you explain before how you used to treat regular TB, but now you're treating drug-resistant TB, and why that's important?
Well, regular TB requires 4 different medications. It's a 6 to 8 month course. There are very few side effects, and the cure rate is about 95%. And the drugs only cost about $20 to $30 per course. Multi-drug resistant TB drugs cost 100 times as much. The cure rate worldwide is only about a little less than 50%. And it requires 18 to 24 months of treatment with horrendous side effects. So a lot of people call multi-drug resistant TB contagious cancer. Up until this year, because the Global Fund came in 2008 and took over regular TB, we've had the capacity to then focus on multi-drug resistant TB, where we enroll about 1,000 to 1,200 people a year. The problem is that the Global Fund has now withdrawn from North Korea. So all of a sudden, all of the 130,000 odd regular TB patients, plus the 5% of the multi-drug resistant patients covered by the Global Fund, will no longer be supported next year. So this really is a catastrophe.
How much does North Korea need help from outside, like humanitarian, like organizations like yourself? What is the medical situation, the healthcare system in North Korea like?
They have a universal healthcare system, but because of the stressed economic situation, the availability of expendables, the availability of medical equipment, the availability of regular medicines is very low. So you can go to the hospital, you have a right to do that, and you can see a doctor, and you can get a prescription, but you can't always guarantee that that hospital will have medication to actually treat the problem that you've gone to the hospital to take care of. So it's a serious situation.
So I guess we do need help. We do need to help them with these kind of organizations to tackle this kind of epidemic.
This is not the time to withdraw from North Korea. And I understand that there were political considerations in the Global Fund's decision as well as other. But unfortunately, they made that decision before the recent thaw in relations, which is very unfortunate.
I mean, that's right, because international economic sanctions placed on North Korea, technically they shouldn't be involve food and humanitarian aid and medical aid, but a lot of these kind of international organizations, they also do get influence politically.
Yes.
I mean, why is that?
There's a certain amount of institutional liability. In other words, while they know there's a need and while they may be reasonably satisfied with the program they have in North Korea, they're very concerned about things like sanctions against their bank accounts should they run afoul of one of the sanctions regimens. The latest sanctions, for instance, prohibits metal, and a lot of states have interpreted that to mean anything that contains metal, so that even a metal glasses frame would not work, or metal chopsticks. So that the latest sanctions have thrown the whole a whole series of normal, regular humanitarian-related items into question. And some organizations are just not willing to take that risk.
I mean, has it affected your organization?
Yes, we need to send, we need to have more our patients have to have inpatient care at a certain point. And so we had a very robust program for providing prefab, well-insulated patient treatment centers manufactured on the outside in South Korea and shipped to North Korea. And we've been working on this program for a long time, and everything was all in place, and we had our pilot completed, and all of a sudden, we found ourselves unable to ship them because the roofs have tin on them. Doorknobs are made of metal on the doors. So, yeah, it has affected us. Gratefully, we can still send medications, but fundamentally, it becomes very difficult to have a serious medical program without any metal parts.
But there are concerns from cynics, I would say, who would say that North Korean regime cannot be trusted to get the medical supplies to the people who desperately need them. What is your response to these concerns, and how has the foundation tackled these?
Well, I can only speak for our program. I'm not involved, but say you're a North Korean TB patient, and we think you may have multi-drug resistant TB. The way you get into our program is you meet with someone on our delegation and you give me a sputum sample. I test this in very high-tech medical equipment to decide whether you have TB and whether you have drug-resistant TB. It's a DNA, it's a machine that reads DNA. I can confirm that you have MDR-TB through a test that we do immediately. Every 6 months, I come back and I get another sample from you, face to face. And if I run this through further analysis in a laboratory in South Korea, I can confirm whether or not the treatment is even working for you or not. So I know where you started, and every 6 months, I can pick up a sample that will tell me pretty much how your treatment is going, all the way until the time that you're discharged from the programs. That level of transparency is hard to beat.
Checks and balances, and verifiable.
Yes.
One word that was missing from the nuclear deal recently.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that I could do that legally in any other country.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it would be a violation of patient privacy. You would run into a lot of obstacles. I'm not sure that other governments would be very anxious about foreigners coming in and physically testing and treating their patients the way we do in North Korea.
Before we go, I mean, we've got a few minutes left. I just want to talk about your recent experiences. So the Eugene Foundation works directly with the North Korea's regime's Ministry of Health. Have you noticed anything different, change over the years in dealing with the regime and over 3 generations of leaders, especially?
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and so I think to boil it down, you can say this. Basically, an effective medical program is all about access. And certainly we have far better access today than we did when we began regular TB work in 1997. Over the years, our access has gotten better and better and better. And to that extent, the clarity of our program, I don't want to say transparency perhaps, but the clarity of our program has gotten better and better and better. North Koreans are obviously suspicious, particularly about people who come from countries that have a hostile policy toward them, or they believe have a hostile policy toward them. But if you demonstrate that you have no political interest, that you have no hostile intent, Koreans can be surprisingly open. And I think that's been our experience in North Korea. So that at this particular point, we could expand this program and physically enroll every MDR patient in North Korea if we had the resources to do it. And it's a crying shame we don't, because every year that we don't enroll them means the numbers of MDR patients go up.
Aid to North Korea is, of course, not only a South Korea-US issue, but an international one. And the whole world needs to get involved. If North Korea really does start to show its intent to denuclearize, how does the international community need to get together to act? And do we need to wait for them to show that they are denuclearization? I mean, this is perhaps one point that you might have an issue with as well.
Yeah, I really think that a humane society has certain givens that are never that are never compromised for political purposes. And one of the things is that you treat people with infectious diseases. Whether you like them, hate them, it really doesn't matter. If they have a serious, life-threatening humanitarian issue that you can deal with in a transparent manner, making your treatment of that particular problem subject to some sort of political consideration on their part, I think is out of line. So there should be a dual-track system where basic humanitarian needs are met with regardless of the political or military tensions, or perhaps even in times of war. And I think that's where most of the humanitarian aid organizations got started. It was actually between combatants. Having said that, then what do you do about the economic side? The Koreans are pretty progressive people. And I think, just like South Korea, I think they would benefit more from opportunities than handouts. And so, other than basic humanitarian needs, I think a relaxation in the elimination of sanctions would do far more for the life of ordinary North Koreans than massive subsidies from the international community. And I think that's probably good news. But these people are determined to get ahead, just as South Koreans have been determined to get ahead for a long time. And it would be nice to see them get the opportunity.
Well, it's been a fascinating insight, and thank you for coming in and giving us, explaining to us everything that you're doing. And we wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks again for inviting me.
And that brings us to the end of our show. I'll be back tomorrow with another guest for more insights and analysis of the day's top stories. But in the meantime, stay tuned to Arirang TV for our later news updates throughout the day. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.